Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Raising Consciousness. Today I sit down with Alec as we talk about and discuss expanding consciousness, which the show is all about, right? I'm really looking forward to sharing this episode with you. So with that said, let's hop on over into today's episode and enjoy. Welcome to Raising Consciousness with me, Lou Burrows, where raising human consciousness happens. On this show, I'm joined by guests to cover a range of topics and have conversations that will raise human consciousness for current and future generations. Now, let's dive into today's show. All right, Alec, thank you so much for joining me today here on Raising Consciousness. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. For those who don't know who you are, like in a sentence or two, it would be really great to hear from the man himself, who you are, what you do, and then we'll dive into the conversation today all about expanding your consciousness.
Yeah, so right now, my period of my life, I'm actually mainly a sales professional. So I do a lot of sales stuff, but also on the side, I've done various psychic work, spiritual teaching. I'm also on YouTube. So I just guess I'd call myself a sales professional, spiritual mentor.
Amazing. And how did you come into the world of personal development, personal growth, the spiritual work? What's the background?
Yeah, for sure. So, growing up, I had like Tourette syndrome. So I had a lot of like mental health issues. I've had a lot of anxiety, depression, negative thinking. And I actually used to grow up really Christian. So like a lot of my upbringing, a lot of my spirituality stuff that I still integrate in my practice today is like Christian based. But then I kind of went through a typical like college phase where I didn't really have any kind of spirituality or religion. And basically how I got into personal development is actually kind of a funny story. I was at like a spring break doing typical college, spring break college stuff. And I kind of just had this awakening that I wasn't really being who I really was, what I call God wanted me to be. And at the time, I actually had a huge ego. Like I developed this big ego that was basically built around a lot of childhood insecurities, a lot of shame, stuff like that. And really, my personal development journey kind of started when I started doing YouTube videos. I like looked up YouTube videos, like I have a big ego. How do I solve this? Or what even is an ego? And that's kind of where I kind of went down the rabbit hole of various psychology and personal development and studying habits and the subconscious mind. And just, various types of personal development, spiritual, business, just basic like make up your bed, workout stuff like that. I would say it really came from spiritual realization, but also just a really curious understanding of reality and my personal psychology.
Yeah, I mean, like we all have different stories and different journeys to kind of get into the personal development space, or or improving oneself. So, it's great to kind of to hear a bit more about your journey in that. I mean, in terms of consciousness, though, like that's not something that is in the mainstream, in the kind of the status quo. So, a part of this show now is to bring awareness to personal development, but also just to raise the conversation around specific issues and that because I feel like consciousness is a very important thing, right? And so not a lot of people understand it. So from your perspective, like uh, yeah, how did you come into like the consciousness side of the work, and was you always open to exploring that? Because a lot of people, yeah, if I say consciousness to them, they may not have any idea
Mhm.
on what the hell I'm talking about.
Yeah, and it's something that there's not a lot of scientific understanding on. I feel like science has done a lot to understand things, but one science thing that science is yet to understand is consciousness. So when people
Mm.
say that, it's really broad range of intellect. You could be, it's a very deep question. And I would say that the reason I got into it is because of a lot of spiritual teachings, more like universal teachings from various spiritual teachers. They all talk about it. I also got really into learning about like densities, so like dimensions, stuff like that. And really, I feel like a lot of people make it complicated because people just like making stuff complicated. I would say just consciousness, in my opinion, from my personal experience, all it is a heightened state of awareness. And that
Mm.
doesn't necessarily have to be spiritual. It could be, what am I eating? When I'm
Yeah.
working out, am I doing it right? Like it could just be very simple awareness. And I would just say all consciousness is a heightened state of awareness.
No, I like that. On the first episode I did of the show, I was kind of explaining my definition of what is human consciousness, right? And so
Mhm.
I pretty much said that like in my own words, like when you think of consciousness, think of awareness, and so kind of touching on that, why if we have somebody listening or somebody watching, and they're like, well, why is that important? Like, what would be your response to that?
Well, I could take that in a lot of different directions. I mean, from a more macro perspective, in my opinion, a lot of human issues or problems of humanity comes from us living from our animalistic mind compared to my opinion. I know this will offend some people, from our spiritual mind. When you have a heightened sense of awareness or consciousness, across all religions, really that's what it's leading you to, is a heightened sense of awareness. Now what happens after that, those are deeper questions, but really any religion or any spiritual practice is helping you live more from a spiritual place rather than an animalistic place. And if on a macro level we can live less from this animalistic survive, a lot of tribal programming, which you don't see that until you raise your consciousness. There's going to be a lot of poverty issues, because essentially what the difference between someone with a low consciousness and a high consciousness is someone low living very much from survival. And we know that if you're living from survival, this is where emotions like greed or these problems that have plagued humanity for a long time, that's where they come from, because it's from a, I'm not trying to sound arrogant, but it comes from a sense of ignorance, that you think you're this
Mm,
body, that you think this is all there is, and I just need to survive. I just need to keep surviving. So I'd say from a macro perspective, a lot of issues such as world hunger, and another thing too, I'm not trying to talk all over the place, but when you're raising your consciousness, you're essentially becoming more selfless. And when you're
mm,
more selfless, you feel the need to help others more. And there's more, a lot of people talk about in the consciousness community, 5D Earth, some people call it New Earth, some people call it a great awakening, whatever you want to call it. Essentially, what we have to do to get to that society is we need to become more selfless. And the way
mm,
we do that is we have to stop thinking so much from our survivalistic mind or fear-based mind. We have to think from a higher perspective. And that doesn't mean you neglect your survival needs, or you neglect, there is a time, there is, primal development is there for a reason. There are certain animalistic skills you have to develop as a human. But if we just keep living from this animalistic place, like, oh, I want to be the biggest macho man in the tribe, or just simple things, lust, stuff like that, it's going to be very hard. From people talk about peace on earth and stuff like that. Now from a more
mm,
micro perspective, I can just say from my own life, there's so many programs where if you study consciousness or you study psychology, 95% of your thoughts are subconscious. And a lot of our belief systems, one thing that will happen to you when you raise your consciousness, and this is something I'm still trying to integrate within myself, is you start taking a step back before someone tries to project a belief system onto you. And I'm not saying that's bad. I'm not saying that you don't need any programs. I mean, some, super enlightened people would say that, but, I'm not going to sit here and say that. But what I'll say is that if you detach from certain subconscious programs that no longer serve you, you'll find that when you elevate your mindset, your life will just practically improve. And I've noticed for me, I've had a lot of like self-esteem issues, a lot of like relationship issues, a lot of, still a lot of money beliefs that I'm still working through right now. But really just having that heightened awareness of like, I am not these programs, and consciously picking what programs I want to live my life through. And I'm not going to act like I know which ones are right or which ones are wrong. I'm just saying that we need to, as a society, pick what paradigms we want to live through, from whatever, religion or, spirituality or whatever you value, but making the conscious decision to live from these programs, rather than just because you grew up in a certain environment or you were taught a certain thing, you making the conscious choice to pick what programs you want to live for that resonate with you. And I
mm,
think, your thoughts have such a big impact on your emotions you feel day to day, your health. Oftentimes people that get more into consciousness get more into health, and just being able to
totally agree.
really, I guess, think for yourself and I'm not saying you should only rely on yourself. You know, you could rely on a higher power or mentors, but more of like just common, poverty. We think about, programming that's really plagued society, poverty programming, divide and conquer programming, all these kind of things can really prevent someone from just living a life of peace. And you can't create peace on a macro level until you create it within yourself. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that was kind of a long-winded answer, but yeah.
No, no, absolutely. I completely agree with that. I think, I kind of say it as live from like the inside out, right? So you're living from this place of like knowing your own values, like the things that you consciously choose to believe in, the things that you want to kind of guide your life because it's your choice, right? Your decision. And you've brought more awareness to, let's just say, the value. Like if one of somebody's core value is I'm going to live a life of like kindness, right? And so going to be kind. Then they brought more awareness to that, and so they can um, go through life like with
Mm-hmm.
that lens. So I think that's very important, and having those moments of deep thinking and deep reflection isn't, in my opinion, something that we get. What's the word I'm looking for? Something that we don't get. Uh, recommended to us, like I feel like society and life is always quite busy, but I found for myself really valuable when we take that step back and we're able to reflect. That might be because I'm more introverted, and so that kind of habit and that kind of practices comes very
Mm-hmm.
naturally to me. How important do you feel that is to the state of raising one's consciousness, of having that time to reflect and have that time to look inwards?
Oh, I think it's so important. Kind of touching on your kindness point, I feel like that's a thing most humans genuinely value. I feel like
Mm,
humans. I've studied a lot of human psychology, a lot of human, tribes, countries. Most humans value kindness. Most humans don't want to do things that we see on the news. The reason you can't live from that place of kindness again is because you think you're your body. You're too in
mm,
your survival mind, and I mean, we all need to survive. We need to eat. We need to put food on the table. It's that integrity. And when you live from that higher consciousness of not thinking so much like, well, if, because I can just say, for example, for me, I've really struggled with like my money beliefs and like fear of poverty and stuff like that. As I've taken more entrepreneurial risk this year, that fear is really purged out.
mm,
And I've struggled with greed. If I'm just being honest, sometimes I can get really greedy, and I don't really think it comes from this place of like I'm super egotistical or I want to, be this macho guy. It's just more of like I still haven't raised my consciousness to the level where I can just operate from a higher place, a place of trust. If I do the right thing, if
mm,
I live kind, that I will be taken care of. Because a lot of us, with like something like kindness, we look out in the world and it's kind of like what you're saying. We're always looking out. We're not looking within. We're always looking out. When we look out at the world, we see like successful people. We see all the lawsuits. We see, maybe what they've done with their romantic partners, or,
mm,
we assess that. And then we look at that and we're like, well, I can't get to that level unless I'm a bad person. I don't want to be a bad person. So I'm not going to be kind. But then what you fail to realize is that, that thought process isn't going to make you kind in your day to day life. So it just always comes back to being able to survive from a higher place, which takes a lot of
mm.
trust, usually a lot of therapy, healing. It's not simple, but it is at the same time.
One thing I know that we wanted to touch upon today was the the process, the journey of expanding that consciousness, right? So for me, I actually see consciousness as different levels. So we have like our individual level of consciousness all the way up to I call it like the collective consciousness, right? So the understanding, therefore, that we are part of something bigger, So we have like the so yeah, it starts like within ourselves. So like the choices that we make and becoming more aware to the choices we
Mhm.
make on a daily basis. Again, all the way up to that bigger level of or that higher level that we're all part of something a bit much greater and bigger than ourselves, and things that are interconnected. So in your experience and with the work that you've been doing, how have you been able to expand your consciousness? Because for me, I feel like it's a journey. It's not just like one day. You're not that conscious, and the next day you're kind of aware of everything, super heightened and super aware of everything. So for me it's definitely a journey, and I'm interested in, from like your own journey, your own process, some of the things that maybe you've done, whether it's certain practices, whether it's certain knowledge that you've obtained. Yeah, like how you've been able to expand your own level of consciousness.
Yeah, so kind of before I get into that, kind of carrying off your point, I would say keep it simple. If I'm just being honest, I feel like a lot of people in this community, one of the dark sides of personal development, in my opinion, is that they don't want you to develop, because if you develop,
Mm,
you're no longer money to them. So you don't,
right.
I would just say keep it simple, like do whatever resonates with you, but you don't have to, create a encyclopedia level journal or go
Mm,
up to the Himalayas and meditate. You don't have to do anything crazy like that. I would just say keep it simple, because this is a tough question, right? To start, at least in my experience, I feel like I received the most expansion, honestly, when I detoxed. Before I worried
mm,
about like meditating or self inquiry or just asking myself deeper questions or questioning myself. I just feel like you got to remove a lot of toxic things, whether it be like bad addictions or certain life patterns. And then
makes
I would
sense.
I would just say also too, like just body awareness is could be important too. Like just like, I would just say maybe just some simple mindfulness, but I'd really say in the beginning just detox if you're really
Mm.
serious about
So,
it.
so like come back to more of a centered space, where like with all the kind of like external things going on, is it about like like as soon as you say detoxing, I'm like that's the first thought that comes to mind, of coming back to that more centered space. Am I kind of like on the right lines?
Yeah, I would say so, because I feel like a lot of things that society projects at you, like, oh, you got to watch this show, or you're young, you got to go party, or oh, you're 25,
Mm.
you need to go marry now, or a lot of this stuff, it's distracting. And one of
Yeah.
the ways, if you study the ego, in a lot of like non-duality philosophy, is one of the ways the ego stays alive. Which ego, the ego isn't bad. You need an ego, but it is very survival mind based. A lot of the ways it survives is distraction. And a lot of people
Mm.
think addiction is just doing a drug or doing, drinking or, something like that, or, prescriptions or something. But addictions can run a lot deeper than that. And I feel like, I used to, back when I was in college, I used to like meditate. I was eating better. I was working out, but I was still, because I was in college, right? So I was like, still like, I would, drink, and, I would like, I would watch a lot of YouTube, and I'm not saying YouTube's bad. I'm not saying drinking is bad. I mean, make your own decision, right? But like it more of like I felt like when I started to like just not for like a not like, I'm not saying you got to do it for the rest of your life or you got to like live like a square, but like when I started like, okay, I'm gonna remove this, I'm gonna remove this, I'm gonna remove this, I felt like it was a lot easier to expand compared to if you try to, balance it all. I just feel like detoxing is just so powerful. A lot of people in the personal development community talk about dopamine detoxing. I feel like that is a very powerful way to expand your consciousness, because I mean, what every addiction essentially boils down to is your fear of death. It's really just a distraction from that reality that we're all going to
Mm.
die one day. And that's ultimately where I feel like the consciousness journey eventually takes you, is you have to face your own death. And if you keep doing these addictions, it doesn't matter how much good work you do. I just feel like all that bad work will just pull you down. So I just say detox your life.
Awesome. So yeah, like on the topic of expanding your consciousness, what other kind of thoughts or strategies or things come to mind that you feel would be valuable to share with the audience in the time that we have left here today?
Yeah, for sure. So three things for me really come to mind. Number one is dieting. Now I'm being careful with
Mm,
this because I've gone down bad paths with this. But I would just say one thing that universally anyone can agree with is like try your best to be organic, grass fed if you want to eat meat. But I would just say essentially eat meals with less than five ingredients. A lot of these foods, I
mm,
feel like food is a really big part of your consciousness. And I used to neglect that. Because I was vegan for a while, then I kind of got away from that. And then I'm like, well, diet doesn't matter. I can have high consciousness, with just a crappy diet, but it doesn't work like that. I think eating clean is a big part of it. Then second is just meditation or common mindfulness.
Hmm.
Now this is a journey, especially for me personally. Like I grew up with Tourette's, so like I'm just a natural overthinker. I still struggle with that. But that's a journey, so it's going to take time. So you might want to start off with like some guided ones just to deal with more like anxiety or fear or whatever stress, and then maybe
Hmm.
work your way up to doing it without a guided, and then keep going wherever you want to go with that. And then you could also do prayer too if that resonates with you more. You could
Okay.
do that as well, just some kind of spiritual practice. But really, I feel like the most powerful thing that a lot of monks or enlightened teachers talk about, it's a very advanced level techniques. That's why I put it last, is like self inquiry. It's like you got to
Mm,
question the voice within. So like
mm,
like for example, I think I'm Alec, this human. Well, at what point am I not Alec? If I remove my hand, am I still Alec? If I remove my arm, am I still Alec? Like, where is Alec? And just kind of asking that question of who am I? And when you talk about there's levels to the collective, those questions will help you think from a more universal, selfless perspective compared to a more selfish perspective. But it takes, an open mind. And you also got to be careful with that, though, because sometimes if your consciousness expands too much, it can scare you, it can throw you off the path, and there's a lot of rabbit holes, so I'm trying to be very careful of how I'm wording things here. So I would just say really just the detoxing, cleaning the diet, and just simple mindfulness practices. But also don't be in like a rush to do it. Don't push yourself too much. I feel that's what a lot of people are doing nowadays, and that can really not take you on the right path, because I've been there. So I would say just be, that's part of it too, is being patient. And
mm.
it's not a rush. It's not a race. We just get programmed. It goes back to like the programming, right? You just get programmed so much that we have to rush. We have to, we have to run. We have to run, but we really don't have to do anything. Um, so yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on
Yeah,
that.
I mean, I like that, and I kind of in that I see how it integrates and is in alignment with the point you mentioned before around like the detox. Like if we're starting from the diet perspective, that obviously I can see how that really does play into one's consciousness, right? I mean, I agree with you. Like some of these foods, like now I'm like, I do check the labels and it's like all these ingredients and I'm like, what? Like I'm putting that inside of my body type of thing, so
Yeah, and
part of
and if
my
you, I'm not trying
consciousness
to
journey.
interject, but if you talk to the
Mm,
average Joe, they're like, "Oh, this is just normal." They don't even like.
yeah, yeah,
They
they're
don't
not
even
even
question
aware. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, so like I've noticed that, and kind of thinking about that, my own kind of conscious journey, health is such of a huge part of that. So I completely agree there. And the then kind of moving on to like the mindfulness, I feel, like as you mentioned before, not everyone has to go and meditate on a mountain, but some sort of I feel like some sort of detachment from the outside world, if you want to call it, I feel
yeah,
is,
physical, yeah.
yeah, could be valuable to us all. And so I can I agree with you there. And then the self inquiry, I think, as you mentioned, like it's kind of like that next level. But for me, like I would encourage everyone to, over time, as I mentioned before, for me, it's a journey, right? And so
Hmm.
my goal and my intention is always to help people become a better version of themselves. And I feel like that self inquiry can help people to to move to that place. But as you said, like it's a journey, and to like why rush it? Like um we don't need to rush it ultimately.
Right. And one thing I'll also say too is be aware of people in the consciousness community. You could be thinking you're taking a conscious decision because you perceive someone to have higher consciousness than you. For example, for me, I thought that to be a high consciousness person, I'd have to be vegan. I was like attached to that. But
Mm,
what I didn't realize in that moment is I was agreeing to a program. Now, I'm not saying you
mm,
don't need to be vegan. I'm not telling you what to do. What I'm telling you to do is make a empowered decision. So that's why I kind of said the less than five ingredients. I feel like that's something that most doctors or just most people would agree with. But just be very aware if you get in these kind of communities or group thinks, make sure you're taking a step back, because sometimes when people get in those communities or YouTube channels, they think they're making a high consciousness decision that serves them the best or whatever, religious or whatever, they believe in. But just be very careful, because just because you're in a high consciousness community doesn't mean you can't operate from a lower place, or
mm,
you're taking on things, you know.
yeah.
So
So I
I
think it
just
like
want
it
to make
kind of
it more
comes back to that point of like, is it therefore your decision? Is it therefore like your choice? I feel like wherever we are kind of operating, if it's still in a community that's maybe the consciousness is still higher, but is this still the choices that you're making? Is it still in alignment with who
Mhm,
you are ultimately, or is the decision still based on, oh, like they're super, you know, they have a lot of consciousness, like they're super
mhm,
aware, they're you know super high performers, whatever it is, and like I'm not saying like you can't learn from them and network with them and kind of like for me, I'm always trying to embody like curiosity and that
mhm,
and question like just question things question
mhm,
yourself as well. So yeah,
mhm.
I can see how even in like those communities is this the just question yourself, is the decision still yours basically?
Comes back to like spiritual ego or ego, whatever you want to call it. Like, just be careful with that too, because I know for me, as I expanded my consciousness or I became more aware, I felt like I was cutting myself off to certain just practical wisdom. Like, you
Mm,
might perceive yourself to have more, consciousness than a family member, but at the end of the day, that family member maybe has lived on this planet for 50 years, and maybe they need to tell you something. And I think it takes that heightened sense of awareness too, to just to be open. But
mm,
it's tricky. It's a tricky journey because there's so many traps. So I would just say, just don't get arrogant. Don't look, because I feel like where consciousness should lead you to is a more selfless, loving,
yeah, I
like,
agree.
place. And sometimes I feel like people get in this stuff and then they kind of develop the whole ego around it, like, oh, I'm
Yeah,
this
like I'm super aware
yeah,
and
I'm
I'm
just like
and
I'm
almost
so
like
above
that
humanity, and
better
it's
than
like
you
we're not,
type of
you
thing.
know.
Mm. Yeah, I can definitely see that. Awesome, man. Well, it's been a pleasure to talk with you today. Do you have any final thoughts or words of inspiration?
Well, what I'll say is that I used to be like a super negative thinker, terrible self-esteem, like really just bad on multiple levels, physically, mentally. And what I can say is, on this journey, I've gone from someone that just, I don't know, a lot of people in high school didn't even think I'd graduate college. And as I've expanded my consciousness, like, I mean, I'm not where I want to be, but higher consciousness, right? I'll probably never be where I want to be. But like, my like vision and like my ability to help others has expanded so much. And I've
Mm,
come from someone that used to like, party a lot. I mean, I wasn't like a party animal, but I'd party a lot, and I just didn't really have a lot of like mission and vision, and wasn't really that deep, to someone now where I just feel like I'm only scratching the surface of my potential. And I think really what you need to remember is that the goal is just to live selflessly and just make an impact, and all that other stuff. Yeah, if you become higher conscious, you might make more money, or yeah, you might reach a higher status. And that's how the ego will come in when you get these higher. It's like, oh, wow, look at it. But really, it's about just the day to day becoming more peaceful. Just I just changed so much, and it's just kind of weird just thinking about how much I've changed just from simply just being aware that I'm not my
mm,
thoughts. And
absolutely.
if you just start on your journey, like, it does take time, but it's just like anything else. That daily, meditation habit, a year from now could pay dividends. And in the moment, it might not feel like you're going anywhere, but it's a domino effect. So
Mm.
just keep going and see where it takes you. And
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for today. It's been a pleasure, and I love having these conversations to even bring awareness to the very topic. I feel it is important. So, thank you so much, and yeah, I appreciate your time today.
yeah, for sure. Thanks so much, man. Appreciate it.
And for more after today's show, be sure to head on over to raisingconsciousness.show to get all of the show notes, transcriptions, videos for each episode, and a hell of a lot more. And if you got value from this episode, found it insightful, or learned a thing or two, please leave a review where you can let everyone know that this show is worth checking out. I appreciate you so much. You'll be hearing from me in the next episode.